Again, appreciate you guys all being here this morning, making it work in your busy schedule. We know it's not always the easiest thing, but that's why we make ourselves available in all the ways we can to meet with you guys as you run your business too. So, as always, before we get into our content, what we want to talk about today, we want to talk about any wins that have happened over the last week, set the tone. So what good things have been going on? Anybody want to unmute your mic and tell us the good news?
I'll go ahead and start. We thanks to working with you guys and getting Google Business Profile set up, we got first calls ever from random people on Google, which is great. So small job, couple grand, but that works.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
It's always exciting. The first one, it's like, oh, this isn't like they do find, like, there are people out there. Yeah, it's real. It's happening. Love that.
I would say for us, so I've been dealing with the DBE and MBE reviews. That's minority business certification, and I finally got that completed. So I would say that's the win for the week for
wow.
Yes.
I've heard that thing is one heck of a stack of papers to fill out.
It's a lot, but we're done. So yeah, I mean, that's our good news for this week.
Yeah.
Nice. Love that. Any other wins before we get going here?
Yeah, I got some. So we hired 2 people.
All right.
Got payroll service set up, and we are just really rocking on Google. I think this month we're probably going to break our first $40,000 mark. That's huge for us.
Yes.
All right.
Come on.
Yeah, I know that we don't have a ton of people here yet, and not everybody is on camera. If you are able to turn your camera, we'd love to see you. But I'm just curious. I feel like I've been hearing this a lot from my clients, that they're having one of the busiest starts to the busy season. I know summertime is quite a bit, usually the busiest season for a lot of our contractors. Who here is kind of like, this is feeling like it's going to be, or this is tracking to be one of the biggest seasons we've had. I see Gabe, I see K&B Communicate, Ryan. That is so exciting. And I have a feeling, James, give it a month of getting Google going, you're going to be feeling the same way, because you're going to be having a whole bunch of new leads coming in. So just love to hear it. Please continue to share as you're going through this season of the wins that you're having and the difference you're seeing year over year. I mean, we love to hear it. We love to see it.
Nicole, just to add something,
yes,
we met with our Chad, the advisor that you guys recommended.
Yeah.
So we met with him yesterday, and we were looking at the numbers, and he was saying for May is usually our slow season, and this year we're actually, as you were saying, ramping up, and we're busy, which is great news.
Yes,
that's awesome.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that. Okay, well, any other wins before we get this show on the road here? Going once, going twice.
Quarter.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, we did 250,000 in one quarter.
Yes, and last year, I know I have this because I told the team this yesterday. Last year, right under 126,000, and this year you did 253 from January to April. That's huge.
Come on.
Yeah,
Come on.
and I think that's only one new employee or one employee difference. It's not like it's a ton new staff, generating that difference.
Yeah.
Woo. Okay.
I'm here to prove Nicole wrong, just so you know. Not that she's wrong. I've never seen that before with 2 brands to do $1 million. So marker 1 hit.
You're making it happen. We're loving to see it.
Amazing. Well, that's awesome. Well, guys, we'll go ahead and get started here. If you can change your name at some point throughout the time, just try to rename yourself, click on your face, hit rename, and do something with your name and the name of your business or industry. That way we can put you in good breakout rooms towards the end. But what we're talking about today is duplicating yourself through process. How can I make my business more effective because I'm the best at what I'm doing here and I need to make more of me? If I just had more of myself, man, we'd be doing incredible. Let's talk about it and let's do it. So the first thing I want to do is really get the elephants out of the room. Talking to a bunch of business owners, and what I want to start by saying is that maybe what you've heard, maybe you've thought it, maybe you want to reject it, who knows? I don't know. But the truth of the matter is that no one can do what you do. No one can do what you do. I know I'm preaching the choir when I say this, but without a doubt, you and your brain are the entire value behind why your company exists. And don't get a big head about this, but that is the reality. You've started the business, you are the entrepreneur, you are the creator behind what's going on. So with everything that I say here, I'm not saying anything against that. That is the first and foremost thing. No one can do what you can do. With that, you are the most valuable asset to your company. Ergo, you're also the most valuable employee, the most costly employee. There's a mentality that I have to fight a lot that is, if I do it, then I don't have to pay somebody else to do it. It's cheaper for me to do it than to pay somebody else to do it. That's not true. You are the most expensive employee in your company. When you're doing something that you maybe shouldn't be, or that should be delegated to somebody you're paying less to, you're costing yourself more. And as I say this, I want to also say you are the most valuable asset, and you always will be in your company. You will always be the most valuable, should be highest paid, theoretically or literally, in your company. So I want to make a reference to last week's call before we jump into some of this stuff. If you were not there or you haven't watched it, go back and watch that call. Nicole did a phenomenal job in walking us through owning your schedule. We asked earlier, unfortunately, if anybody had started the day today by doing some planning and some prep, and not too many hands got up. We want the things that we talk about for you guys, for your success, for your benefit. So if you haven't, go back, check out last week's call, because owning your schedule is completely for creating the space to do things both now and later, and the stuff that we're talking about today. So let's jump into it. There's a quote, Andrew Carnegie, a lot of people know him. He's made a great name for himself. But the cool thing about this quote is it's not about himself. He says, no person will make a great business who wants to do it all himself or get all the credit. The natural byproduct is that he did, because he was able to duplicate himself in others and create process and system within his company. So I'm going to give you a simple version. This is kind of a summary slide, if you will, before we jump into the details here and nitty gritty. But if you hear nothing else, hear this part. How do you duplicate yourself? First, identify and execute. There's 3 things I'm going to tell you. 1, what to work on first. Which are the activities in your business taking either the most of your time or consistently taking your time that prevent you from moving the business forward? But also consider just the lowest hanging fruit. What's the easiest thing or the most readily accessible thing for me to make a process that can be managed by others consistently, duplicate, and repeatedly. So that's the first thing. Identify what is your lowest hanging fruit. Second, who on your team can execute? Who on your team has shown promise in areas, either responsibility or just diligence or whatever you want to call it? Who, you know who it is. Who on your team has shown some level of promise, whether it's just a tiny little bit that needs to be encouraged and grown, or they're actually ready to take on responsibility tomorrow. And the third is actually do it. Create the system. Get your brain on paper. Again, if you hear nothing else today, this is the main thing. You've got to get your brain on paper. I didn't plan on sharing this, but it's something that came from a completely unbusiness related thing. But it's called the word hand illustration. but it talks about meditating, reading, hearing, and studying and memorizing. We retain, I think, something like 5% of what we hear. We retain maybe 10% of what we read. We retain maybe 30% of what we study, and then 100% of what we memorize. That's all good and well about the memorized part, but what I want to make a clear point of is we retain maybe 5% of what we hear. Your team is only going to retain about 5% of what they hear from you on a regular basis, even if you say it all the time. But if it's documented, it makes a big difference in actually being able to be heard and understood and done. So third thing is create a checklist. Just simply get your brain on paper. Again, you are the most valuable asset. So that's what we want to do, is get what is valuable in here into a duplicable process. Still tracking with me so far? Everybody with me? Awesome. Okay. So plain and simple, there's a lot of ideas around what a system is. It maybe could be a buzzword that you guys, I'm sure, have heard a lot, even from us potentially. But a system is simply this. It is a documented step-by-step process or a checklist. It's not always checklists. It could just be procedure. How do you handle this? But here's the facts. What they're designed to do, a system, is creating consistent results to duplicate success or avoid failure. Something is happening in your business every day. It's either good or it's bad, right? If you have really good days, how do we make more of those good days? Duplicate those things. How do we avoid mistakes that we've made today in the future? Make a process around avoiding those mistakes. So that's the fact, is they create consistent duplicate success, minimize mistakes or missteps, increasing efficiency. And at the end of the day, guys, it's a must. If you want to scale your business beyond yourself, the only way that you can ever do that is if you don't have to be there to tell people what to do every day. It has to be documented. That is the only way to ever scale yourself outside of your business. So there's a book that I actually really would recommend. Here's a kind of a book plug. It's called The Checklist Manifesto by a guy named Atul Gawande. He's a general surgeon. He said that under the conditions of complexity, not only are checklists a help, they're required for success. If you're thinking right now, is anybody thinking, yeah, that's fine, but what we do is too complex. If I make a checklist, it'd be 10, 20 pages long. If you're thinking that, don't, because in this book, The Checklist Manifesto, which I would recommend you read, but he talks, the two most prominent industries he talks about in here are medicine and aviation specifically in emergency situations.
Life or death is what I'm hearing.
Life and death. Exactly right. Your business is life and death too. It's your life because it's so intimately entwined. But the two most prominent industries that these checklists are described in this book are medicine and aviation. Very complex situations, emergency stuff, and it works. I could tell you some of the stories that he shares in the book, but I'll just say, go ahead and check it out because it is a really valuable resource. But know that it does work for you. No one is really above a checklist, and we'll talk about that more here in a second.
Yes, and I want to highlight that a little bit. Is sometimes, and you might be totally down, so to have a checklist or create one. Sometimes it can, your ego or your pride might get a little bit in the way of, oh, I don't need a checklist, or what I do is too, there's no way that I could be duplicated. What I do is too special. Or you might have an employee. In fact, I dealt with this with a client earlier this week where the employee was refusing to use a script. I've never been a script person. I don't like scripts. I don't feel like I should need one. I've been doing this for so many years. And it's like, we are in no way criticizing you or saying you're doing a bad job. What we are saying is that as a company, this is an area that we do not have a system built around. And if you were to leave, we would be SOL. And there's always room to improve. We're trying to solve a problem. And so I'm coming alongside you. I'm not fighting against you. I'm not criticizing you. I'm coming alongside you and saying, help me solve the problem. Help me build the system. Nobody, I mean, this guy is a surgeon. Nobody is above a checklist. Nobody. And so whether it's a script or a checklist or a outline, there's no room in your business that is too special, or there's nobody in your business that's too special to not benefit from this, to not commit themselves to this.
Absolutely right. And that includes you yourself. Again, it's not at all a dig on your ability, but actually it's the fact that you have to manage so much. It would be unreasonable. So Atul Gawande, he's a general surgeon. And he jokes about the fact that in his book, there really at this day and age shouldn't be such a thing as a general surgeon. There can't be such a thing as a general surgeon. Why? We know too much. We know too much about medicine. That he's a general surgeon that focuses on orthopedics, which is the bone side. I think, I may be wrong about that, don't fact check me, but there has to be a specialization within each of these general surgeons as well. That's the same thing for you. So don't take it as an insult about, well, I don't need a checklist. Well, that's fine, but why don't we make a way to put our best foot forward every single time? If we sold this job really well, it went really smooth for some reason. Why? How did that happen? So there's 3 layers. If we're talking about checklists in particular, there are 3, I guess, layers or things to consider with a checklist. This is kind of the nitty-gritty details, but stick with me. I promise it's worthwhile. First is the process layer. How is the system executed? What's the process? This is straightforward, just the step-by-step check this box system. What things need to happen? The second is the presentation layer. A checklist only really makes sense if it makes sense to the person using it. You got to use specific, concise, easy to understand language. An effective checklist will have specific language. It'll tell you what the thing is. It's not vague. It will have concise language as well. It's not going to be wordy for no reason. You don't have to include all the details, but it's also going to be easy to understand because you can't put a bunch of jargon and acronyms in there that someone that doesn't know everything that you do can't just pick up. So the presentation layer matters. And actually, what I found too is when we make a checklist, and I've done this with a lot of the business owners that I work with, when we make a checklist, there's a difference between the rough draft phase and the actual graphic design phase and how much people actually use it. For some reason, when you put a logo on there and you give it some color that kind of breaks things up, people like it more. They actually use it more. It's weird. People are weird. The third part is the purpose layer. When you make a process in a checklist, don't just fill your business with, don't go checklist crazy. Don't just fill your stuff with everything that I can do. I'm going to give a process to. There has to be a why, and your team needs to understand that why as well. Hey, we do this all the time. We install new panel breakers or circuit breakers, panel boxes all the time. But we keep running into mistakes. Let's just make a simple checklist for how to do that because we don't want to have those mistakes. Callbacks cost the company money, cost you time, all that sort of stuff. And this is what we said earlier. We already harped on the point, but no one is above using a checklist. This, in the book, the Checklist Manifesto, he did a survey after he made the first round of checklists. Surgeons, I think, like business owners, and I think just like people in general, we have this sense of, I don't need that for XYZ. In the survey, he said that only 20% of surgeons would like to use a checklist in their operations, meaning that only 20% of them said, yeah, I'll use a checklist. But on the flip side, 94%, almost every single one of them said, but if I ever was to go into operation and someone was operating on me, I want the surgeon to use a checklist on me.
So good.
Oh my gosh. No one's above using a checklist. We want it to be used for when stuff is done for us, but we don't want to be the one to actually use it. A checklist, again, does not or a process or procedure does not equal incompetence. In fact, it's just helping you use your brain for your highest and best use more often. The simple stuff, just follow a procedure, go into autopilot almost. Autopilot can be a good thing.
Yeah, what made this really real to me, because I'll admit I'm somebody who can be a little bit prideful sometimes. And when every single revenue growth employee started in sales. If we ever tell you to make cold calls, know that there was a time in our lives where we were making over 200 cold calls a day and we hated ourselves. Okay. So we've all been there. we know the struggles. But there was a time where I felt like I did not need to use the script. I felt like I was too good for it. I got to the point I was booking appointments. I didn't need it anymore. I knew the gist. I didn't need the script. And then one day I got extremely humbled by one of our managers because he said, Nicole, how long is a typical song that plays on the radio? Can anybody tell me here? Can you just unmute? How long would you say a typical song is that plays on the radio? What would be average? Anybody know?
2.5 minutes.
2.5 to 3 minutes. 3 minutes is pretty max. Okay. Does anybody know how long Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen is?
9.5.
Yeah, it's I think it's around 6. And here's the deal. I am not Queen. Okay. I'm not Queen. When it comes to scripts, I'm not Queen. Okay. Queen gets to do that. They get to have a 6-minute song on the radio because it's Queen. Okay. They're the best. All right. And so if anybody thinks that they are above scripts, you're not above it. There's only one Queen in the entire history of music. Until you get to that level, you've got to stay committed. You've got to stay committed to the process, committed to scripts. Nobody is above it.
Amen. Okay. I thought about making this slide just the very first line on here about what systems do I need and leaving it at that. But I gave a couple of examples that I'm just going to blow through real quick. But don't think of these as I have to have this or whatever it is. Really, the end of this is where there's a need or where there's a pitfall or something that can alleviate some of your time. That's where it is. But every repeatable process, and by repeatable, I don't necessarily mean simple. I just mean regular or common, something that you do consistently, that you can say that, you probably do 2, 3, 4 times a week or a month, depending on the, flow of your business. But every repeatable process in your business needs a system. A few, and we have calls on all of these group calls in the inventory, but a few would be onboarding and offboarding employees. You may not think of this at first, but consider how much time it would save if you were able to get a person up to full speed in your business from hiring in 2 weeks rather than 2-3 months. How much time, money, cost would that save? Or your sales process, having a service call checklist, an inspection and safety or cross-selling or upselling checklists, tracking leads and communicating with them and follow-up. Can we automate that? Yes. Yes, we can. We can automate a lot of the follow-up, and it makes a huge difference in being able to close sales. If we just copy and paste, change out names, those touch points matter. How you create estimates. Do you almost have to refigure it out every time you do? That takes a lot of time. How you deliver estimates. What's the best way to cover all your bases so that you know that the customer is aware of all of your potential fees or change orders or things like that up front versus as needed? How do we make sure that we're talking about the value we deliver rather than just the price at the end of the day? Putting your best foot forward every single time. What works? Duplicate it. Administrative tasks, stuff like a daily, weekly, monthly office tasks. Again, a lot of this is almost the way I think about it too is for yourself. A lot of the stress that you may experience as a business owner is just trying to make sure that you don't forget everything you were supposed to remember. Gotta hold it all in there. Alleviate some of that stress. Give yourself some defaults, some autopilots to be able to fall into. A big one with this is collections. If we just follow up with people that we need money from whenever we're short on cash, that is going to create stress rather than having a consistent process or an administrator be able to follow a script or send an email. That's the same. Okay. I know I've been moving pretty fast, but here's a different version of that summary slide that we started with. This is the last thing that I'll share before we go into breakout rooms, because I do want to give us time to figure out what the first system we should create is, and then actually start putting the rough draft on paper. The best way to test a system is to just run it, create it, and then run it and see if it fails. If it fails, fix it. But there's a lot of iterations in the process. Here are 4 steps to creating a system with more detail. Before we talked about, what can be processed or made into a system, who can help do it, and then simply create it, put it in there. This is a little bit more detailed, but it's essentially the same stuff. Overarching thing though, before I get into steps, is build one checklist at a time or a process. We have a bad tendency to really halfway finish a lot of stuff. You probably have 4 or 5 different projects or things that you've wanted to do in the business that you've started something, but it's just not quite finished yet. One at a time, complete the circle and then start a new one. Complete the circle, then start a new one. And build them as you see a need. Again, don't just flood your business and your employees with a bunch of checklists. Hey, we're doing checklists now. Give it space where there's need. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of pencil whipping happening, and that helps nobody. Okay, here are the steps. First, notice a team member or yourself doing a repeatable, and by repeatable, I mean regular or common, consistent task, and it's not being done right, or is taking too long. Then you know it's time to create a checklist or a process or a system. That's step 1. See the need. Step 2, do the task yourself. You may already be doing it, but run through the task yourself. As you do it, write down each step as you go. Or pro tip, you can have somebody else do this. I do this a lot with business owners I work with in training, new guys. Have them create the first draft of something, and then together you refine it. See what they do know and fill the gaps by having them put it on paper first. But performing the task yourself, write down each step as you go. You do this once, it takes you, maybe 5 minutes longer than it normally would to do the task itself. But it saves you 5 minutes every day, twice a day, 3 times a day for the next week, month, year, everything like that. And then review it, make sure it makes sense. Third step, have a different team member perform the task using the system. The best way to check a checklist is to run it. Have somebody that doesn't know what they're doing try to use the checklist. If they can't, it needs some work. Or if they have to ask a bunch of questions, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? And it needs some refinement. Ask for feedback. It's okay. No checklist is going to be right from the first step. Yeah, again, the checklist manifesto with Atul Gawande, he talks about how the first iteration that they made, he was tasked with reducing medical mistakes in the operation room. An incredibly vague and broad task, but he did it. But the first checklist that they made was probably 20 steps. Through refinement, they were actually able to narrow that down just to 5. What are the main things? They don't have to detail every single step. They just have to detail maybe the mind-numbing steps or the stuff that's commonly forgotten. Yeah, it's never right the first time. And then the 4th is once you've done the refinement, you've made the checklist, you've tested it, or the process or the system, doesn't have to be a checklist. Take that to your next team meeting and actually train your team. Take the time, sit with them, and then hold them accountable to that new system each meeting. But it means nothing if you put all this work in and then hand somebody a piece of paper, just like with the one sheet. I know we're not talking about sales today, but it can relate to sales. With the one sheet, if you just give somebody a one sheet, they're never going to read it. But if you talk through the first 2 points, hey, something that we want you to know that separates us from the other guys is that we're going to call you back within 24 hours, or we're going to always set an appointment with you from the last appointment we had, so you're not waiting on us. Other guys, you may have to hunt them down, stuff like that. You talk through 2 points, they're encouraged to read the rest. That's a sales opportunity. But with the checklist, actually train your team. Hey, here's the why behind this. This is, the first step. I noticed this happening. Or I know a better way. And this is what we did. So this is all that I want to say at the end of this is before we go into breakout rooms, and Jonathan will have you send this out. But all I want to say is use this time right now to do 2 things. Identify the first need. What is a repeatable process? And second, start to put your brain on paper. Make the first draft and think of it that way, as a first draft. It's going to take some refinement, but we'll get something good in the end, and you'll save yourself time every single time it's used. Time, thought, cost, all that. So I'll hop off my soapbox here and we'll jump into breakout rooms. Jonathan.